What's up, Gary?
Hey, Brian.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Awesome. How's everything going?
pretty good.
You're in Arizona, is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm hanging out on some BLM land west of Tucson, Arizona in my van.
Okay. Now, is this what you do? You travel around like this?
Yeah, I'm a van lifer. Have been for 7, 8, 9 years now.
Okay.
Just traveling around, doing adventures.
Awesome. I mean, that sounds like the dream to a lot of people.
I know I hear from a lot of people. Yeah.
The main reason I want to have you on is because I want to talk about some high points. You you told me kind of just a second ago off air, 49 and a half high points. Talk about that for a second. I know you just kind of told me off air, but tell me what that means. 49 and a half of the 50 high points.
Well, Denali was the last one I had to do in Alaska, and I went there in 2016, and we didn't summit. Um, I was guided. We got to 14,000 feet. We got snowed in for like 9 days stuck in the tent. And finally we had to bail. I went back again, I think 2 years ago with a private group. Same thing happened. We got to 14,000 feet, got snowed in. One of our, one of our members came down with frost nip or frostbite. So it was time for somebody to take him down. And so I took him down. The other three members of our group did summit, but they really pushed the envelope to do it. So
So that I mean, Denali, that's the tough one, right? I mean,
yeah,
not only is it incredibly difficult to get to, the time it takes, the financial commitment it takes to do all that. Denali seems to be, if you're going to knock out all 50 of these things, that seems to be the tougher of the bunch.
yeah, logistically speaking, yes. All those things, financial. I mean, the weather alone is the big thing that you can't control. Um, so
What
that's
time
really what turned us back.
what time of year did you go?
First time I went was early May. Second time was late May. Probably should have hit. Probably should have gone in June. Both years they had a much higher percentage of summiters in June, as it turned out.
And for those that don't know, because I don't know either, I've done 35 high points, and I live in the southeast, so all the ones I lack are in the west, and then obviously Denali is one I lack as well. But for those that don't know, it for someone like me or anyone really on the East Coast or on the east of the Mississippi, I mean, there's no way to get any kind of mountaineering experience out here. I mean, you almost have to go to train in, or am I wrong? Is there something that we could be doing, us that don't live near Rainier or Hood or anything like that? Is there something that we could do maybe east of the Mississippi that we could do to train?
Yeah, well, I'm from New England. I'm from New Hampshire, so I was training in the White Mountains, the Adirondacks. I've done all of those high peaks up there. The Northeast 115 I've done, but in Tennessee and the Carolinas, you've got the Southern Sixers, which I've just started dabbling in recently. I've gotten 20 of those 40 something peaks. So there is some elevation you can get in the east of the Mississippi to train, but really Colorado is the place you want to go to train
Mm.
for some of these higher peaks.
So it's not really the elevation I'm referencing, which yes, you're 100% right. I'm talking specifically about the mountaineering experience.
Yeah.
How would you get experience like that if you weren't in a Colorado or up there in a northeastern or northwestern Washington?
I guess you just have to go and do it. That's basically it. And fortunately, I had the time and the wherewithal to get out there and start climbing some of those mountains out west. And I love it out here. I'm wintering in Arizona right now in my van, and but prior to that, I was living in Colorado for a while and got into all the 14ers up there and hit all the remaining state high points that I had out west, um, picking them off one by one.
Yeah. So logistically speaking, if maybe you're somebody like me, I've got a ton of hiking experience. I can, a lot of elevation experience, but I've never done any kind of climbing, real climbing, like mountaineering. You, what I would almost have to hire a guide or a group. Is that your recommendation?
Yeah, the only one of the state high points in the lower 48 that I went guided on um, was Rainier. Uh, I thought that was the thing to do um, to get the experience that you needed to go on and do bigger peaks, maybe in South America or Denali, for instance. Um, I had a buddy of mine guide me up Mount Hood. Mount Hood was a similar experience to Mount Rainier. Um, Little less of a commitment and challenge, but nonetheless, it's glacier travel, snow travel, and you really need to just get out there and do it um, and gain the experience. And going guided, I thought was the way to go the first time on Rainier.
Yeah. How many have you done Rainier more than once?
Yeah, I've done Rainier 4 times. First time guided, two other times with friends when we didn't summit because conditions didn't really allow it. And then with another buddy, I went back a fourth time to get Liberty Cap. Um, who knew that Rainier had two ranked summits on it for 14ers? Um, so my buddy and I went back to get the subsidiary summit of Liberty Cap in 2016.
Hmm.
And so we became the 12th and 13th climbers ever to summit all the 14ers in the lower 48
Wow.
after we got the subsidiary summit on Rainier.
So how many of those are there? Around 50 or so, or
67 ranked.
67? Wow.
Yeah.
So with Denali, the first time you went guided. It's everything I've read. It's a 3 week kind of minimum commitment. Is that kind of what you saw as well? You were banking on about
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Why, for those that don't know, why does it take that long?
Um, Two reasons. You need to acclimatize because not many people have been to 20,000 feet when they first get to Denali. So you got to slowly work your way up the mountain from base camp, which is at about 7,800 feet, where they fly you into the glacier and drop you off, up to the 14,000 foot um, main base. I say that's the high base camp where most of the people are waiting for their summit bid. From there, most people go up to 17, spend one night, get up early in the morning, and head for the summit. Um, but you have to be totally acclimated to that, to those conditions by the time you get there, so that you can actually make that bid for the summit.
And what was it? You said there was a couple of reasons.
Second, you're dragging a lot of gear. You've got about a 60-pound pack on your back, and you're dragging a 60-pound sled. So that takes some time. And plus you got to build your camps at each site. You have to build your snow walls and set up your tents to protect you from the wind. The wind is a big factor on Denali.
So take me through, Gary. Take me through this because I don't know anything about this. This is fascinating, and one day I don't even want to go so far as to say I aspire to do it, but I feel like it's one of those things I'd need to do, or at least need to attempt. So take me through this. You mentioned a second ago they flew you into the glacier. Just take me from the point where you arrive in Alaska to the point to where you're at base camp and you're trying to summit, or you can't summit because you're snowed in. Take me through just that whole process. Like on day one, I did this. Day two, I did this. Take us through that whole process, if you don't mind.
Oh, no problem. Well, you fly into Anchorage, and fortunately, I had a buddy that lived in Anchorage, Dave Hart. He's the one that I climbed Liberty Cap, the subsidiary Rainier Summit with later on. But I flew in, hung out with him for a couple of days, and then met the group that we were going to climb with Mountain Trip, the guide service I used. And so that was day one, meeting with them. And the next day, they drove us up to Talkeetna, where the airstrip is. Great little town. Hanging out there would have just been fun enough. But finally the weather cleared a little bit and we could see Denali for the first time. Just an amazing mountain in the distance.
Mm.
Head to the little airstrip. We packed all our gear, had it all out. They loaded it on the plane, flew us into the glacier. That takes about, I don't know, half hour to 40 minutes. They land on this glacier. You get out. There's a base camp set up there with tents of people coming and going. And
And
from there, you spend the first night. I know you want to interrupt me right there.
I'm
So
sorry. Well, so that's at that initial where they drop you off. That you said that's 7,800 or so feet.
roughly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So from there, the first day you hike to about 9,000 feet, I think, but you actually lose elevation going down to turn to go up the Kahiltna Glacier. You actually lose about, I think, I don't know, maybe 1,200 feet of elevation, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're coming back at the end of the trip and you've got to reclimb that 1,200 feet to get up to the airstrip and base camp, you you know it. So, and then I think we spent a couple nights at 98, around 9,800, I think. And then eventually made it up to 11,000, which puts you at the base of something called Motorcycle Hill. And that's really where the real climbing begins. Um, you have been on snowshoes up to this point, but you pretty much um, leave the snowshoes at 11,000 feet and put the crampons on because now you're going to be climbing. You have to climb Motorcycle Hill, go around what's called Squirrel Hill. For some reason, I think back years ago, somebody actually saw a squirrel up there at about 12,000 feet. So they call it Squirrel Hill. You go around something called Windy Corner, and if the wind's blowing there, you don't want to linger. It's biting cold and almost knocks you off your feet. And then a couple hours later, you find yourself at 14,000 feet where the main campsite is, and dozens of tents set up of people waiting for the weather to clear for the summit bid.
Mm.
So
So
that
so
all
that
took about a week to 10 days to get there.
just that took a week to 10 days.
Yes.
So give me an idea of, I mean, you're from 8,000 feet, and I know you said you got to go down 1,000, you got to come back up, but in those 6,000 feet, it sounds like, and to get to the 14,000 foot mark, that's a week to 10 days. What
Yeah.
are you like? Is it you're just setting up your own camp at the end of a day hiking?
Yeah. You're spending a lot of what I would say boring time in camp, um, waiting for you're acclimatizing is what you're doing.
Mm.
And everybody's chomping at the bit to move higher, but the guides were very cautious about moving us up the mountain. We would actually go down to get supplies and bring them back up to the camp we're at a couple of times. We would we would climb up, cache some supplies under 6 or 8 feet of snow. We'd
Mm.
have to dig a huge hole and bury it. If you don't, if you only dig down 2 or 3 feet and try to stash your food, the ravens will get into it. And that happened to us on my second trip. Some of our group went up to bury some of our stash. And the next day when we were climbing up, we saw some freeze dried food all over the trail and packages of freeze dried food. And someone in our group said, "Oh, looks like somebody didn't bury their food deep enough." And I go, "That's my initials on that one." So it was our
Gosh.
stuff. So the the two guys that climbed up did not bury it deep enough. So you spend a lot of time caching food, moving it up and down the mountain, and finally getting everything up to 14,000 feet where all the fun begins, if you're lucky.
So and then from there you got another what 7,000 feet, right? Isn't it 20? Is it
Yeah,
21,000?
it's 20,320.
Mm.
So you got over 6,000 feet from there, and you try to do it in two chunks of 3,000.
Mm.
And but like I said, I never got higher. So
How does that make you feel right now, thinking about it?
Well, at the time I came home disappointed both times, but I've had time to reflect and, the weather is what the weather is and you can't really do anything about it. Um, so
Yeah. What's the trail? I don't even know if I can even use that word trail, but what is it like actually climbing up the mountain? There's not a visible trail, since it's just nothing but snow and ice, it would seem like.
well, there is there is a visible trail. The guide services put wands in the snow, and you follow the wands and you follow the people that went ahead of you. The big problem occurs when it snows. And I told you the last time I went to Denali, I had to bring down another climber um, who was having frostbite. So we got down to that 9,800-foot camp, and we got snowed in for 2 days where there was like 2 or 3 feet of snow. And when we packed up the next morning to head uh, to the airstrip, we couldn't see the wands even. They were buried under the snow, and we couldn't see the trail that had been made by the guides that coming up prior to that storm. So we just had to kind of follow the GPS track that he had his phone from our ascent as best we could.
Mm.
But we didn't, we weren't on it perfectly. So we were running the risk maybe of crossing over a hidden crevasse, which is always a danger. But luckily, he was able to keep us close enough to the GPS coordinates that we took on the way up,
Mm.
and we were fine.
Yeah, so that's actually what I was going to ask you next. As far as like the actual like danger, and there's obviously the danger of just being exposed, to the elements. I guess that's always going to be there. But what about, I mean, is there real danger of, you know, falling off the mountain, falling into a crevasse, things like that? Is that, because you hear all these stories about Everest 2023 apparently was their worst year they've ever had up there as far as like deaths go. Does that kind of stuff happen with Denali? I don't really hear about that as much.
Yeah, you don't hear about it as much because I don't think it happens as much, but it is a real danger. When I went guided, they were very careful to stake out the corners of our lot, so to speak, and told us not to go beyond the wands that they put in the snow because they had checked for crevasse danger in that area, but not beyond. So they wanted to keep you, you know, safe, obviously. And I really didn't there was no one on the two trips that I took that I heard of that fell into any crevasses anywhere or had any problems like that. Um, there were people that were up on the mountain that were just like totally wrecked and needed assistance getting off the
Mm,
mountain, or maybe they took a fall and had one guy had to be flown out. I think while we were there.
mm,
Um, I think he took a fall, but I maybe it was a medical. I don't quite remember.
yeah. Yeah, you just hear all these things about, maybe it's just because it's Everest, and Everest is probably the most popular, it's most well known. But I don't you don't really hear anything about Denali, but I know that obviously the danger exists. So thanks
Yeah.
for
Well,
talking about that.
yeah, there's no dangers on Denali that resemble the Khumbu ice fall on Everest or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, and there's no technical climbing such as the Hillary Step. Um, it's all just plodding forward. Some of it's quite steep. If you were to slip and fall, you could really get in trouble. So, and people do.
Mm,
So,
yeah. It's definitely something, I want to do. I think it's every high point, anyone who's doing high points. It's definitely something that's kind of on that bucket list. It's just so unlike everything else, or most everything else. Rainier, I guess, is, and maybe Hood,
yeah.
but there's just nothing else really like that here.
No, there's not. There's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's hilarious because, when you go around, the southeast, like where I'm from, you can drive right up to, I'm in Alabama, you can drive right up to Cheeha, go right into the state park. You can drive right up to South Carolina, basically drive right up to a tiny little walk up a path up to Brasstown in Georgia.
Yeah.
Mississippi, Louisiana, all these ones that are around here is just even Clingman's Dome in Tennessee. You can walk up this path. So it's just to think about all this, and even the more ones that should be more difficult. I remember I did Mount Washington. You can drive right up that through the state park,
Yeah.
and
There's a lot of drive ups.
yeah. So just to think about the difference between all of this, and then you got Denali. It's just a completely different animal.
Hmm.
Um, Gary, what are maybe some of your other favorites? What are maybe or other memorable experiences and some other high points that you've done?
Well, as I mentioned before, I have a book that I have of all my adventures called Chasing Summits, and it's on Amazon if anyone would like to get it. But I detail all of my adventures in here, including all the state high points that I did. In 2009, in this winter spring of 2009, I was gonna go to Ecuador and climb some volcanoes down there that year. But if we all remember what happened in the fall of 2008, the economy went in the tank. And I was working a seasonal job at UPS, which was going to end at Christmas and pay for that trip. Uh, when my finances, I said the economy went south instead. I didn't end up going to Ecuador. Um, Instead, I got in my VW Jetta and I took off for California from New Hampshire on a state high pointing road trip. And over the next 3 months, I hit 34 state high points on one road trip, and it was an amazing time. And there was several memorable summits on that trip.
Well, so what? How? What period of time are you talking here? How long? How long was the trip?
From mid January to mid April, so
Okay.
about a three
Wow.
so about a 3 month trip. And I was camping every night, even though in places like Maryland it was like 5 degrees below zero that night, and it
Hmm.
got pretty chilly in my tent.
What's your favorite high point?
Oh, geez, there's so many. On I'm always partial to Mount Washington, being from New Hampshire. It's such an awesome climb, being up there above tree line all day long, like doing a presidential traverse over all the mountains up there. So I'd have to say Mount Washington is one of my favorites. Katahdin in Maine is a fantastic mountain. I love Katahdin. Have done it several times.
Hmm.
Um, the first state high point I probably ever climbed was Mount Mansfield in my native state of Vermont. So um, I could see it out my window from my college dorm. So um, we climbed that a handful of times when I was in college. So there, there's just so many though.
Yeah. Let's talk about Washington for a second, if you don't mind. You mentioned
Sure.
the presidential traverse. So I took a trip not last summer, the summer before. I took a trip up to the Northeast and I hit them all. I flew into Hartford and kind of did a counterclockwise circle and ended up hitting, Rhode Island. Obviously, is kind of a walk up, and then went up to Maine, did Acadia, and then did Katahdin. Came back through and did Washington. When I attempted the presidential traverse, I didn't make it all the way, but I started at the I guess the north, started from the north going southbound, and I got to Washington and I climbed up Washington, and the weather, and this is in August. This is what
Yeah.
was unbelievable to me. When I started, I'm sure I don't remember the exact trail, but when I started, it was hot and humid. And when I got up that 4 mile, when I got up on the ridge and got up to kind of the first one, it went from hot and humid and 68 degrees, 70 degrees maybe, to 30 degrees, wind blowing like crazy, fog everywhere. And this is in August. And
Yeah.
I spent the next 10 hours because I thought I was going to do the whole presidential traverse. I spent the next 9 to 10 hours rock basically climbing, bouldering. And I had no idea. I thought I was going to be on a trail because I'm used to trails, but it was just all these rocks, and it took a lot out of me. It was a tough that was a tough thing doing the presidential traverse.
Yeah. You can have winter conditions in August on top of Mount Washington, and people don't realize that, and they get in trouble. And that's why there's been so many deaths on Mount Washington. People have died of hypothermia in the summer on Mount Washington.
So from being up there, you're from that area, that general area. How long have you been doing that, kind of Mount Washington or that presidential traverse, that area? How long have you been in the White Mountains? How much experience do you have up there?
Yeah, I've been climbing up there pretty regularly for the last 20 years, although the pretty much the last 10 years I've been out west. Although I have been back to New England several times and got some climbing in back there. We used to have this crazy race. I'm a trail runner, ultra marathoner too, and we used to have this crazy race in the White Mountains that would have like 17,000 feet of scrambling. We would even be off trail sometimes, and that was something I like to go back to do. Um, we would do that in August, and one year we had those winter conditions. Hailstorm came in and drove most of the runners back to camp. So yeah, it can get nasty back there any time of year.
So Mount Washington is inside of a state park, and I guess that the road up to it is probably only open, a certain time of year. It's probably closed for the winter. How how many different ways can you get up to Mount Washington? I mean, are there a few different trails that take you up there? Have you done all that? I'm assuming.
I've done several of the trails. I won't say that I've done them all. Most of the ones that I've done are either coming from north or south on the Crawford Path or the main trail that you would do the presidential traverse on, or up from Pinkham Notch, which is on the east side of Mount Washington, where most of the steepest trails are, including Huntington Ravine, which is probably the steepest trail in the whole White Mountains.
Hmm.
Um, haven't done so much from the west side of the mountain. That's where the cog railway goes up on that side, and it's not quite as steep.
Yeah.
So
So
cog railway is another way to get to the summit.
yeah, I forgot about that. So I just when I got to the park, I got to the top of Mount Washington. I got to the park. I decided to just kind of call it, from there. But my car was parked at the end of the traverse, the
Yeah,
presidential traverse, and I guess there's just like the way around the mountain. It just it's kind of inconvenient to go to get around the mountain, but by vehicle. So I had to actually, I was going to take the cog down. I ended up hiking down, and I hiked right alongside the cog. And it was steep. It was incredibly steep going down that thing.
yeah. Did you see the train go by you?
Oh, yeah. Two or three times.
Did you did you moon it? That's supposed to be a tradition.
I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, you're supposed to moon the cog railway when it goes by you if you're near the tracks.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Well, I'm a year and a half late getting that information.
yeah.
What else do you remember about the White Mountains? Because I mean, that's you hear. I mean, just from the little bit of research I've done, that's one of the more dangerous places in America, in the whole United States, as far as like the weather goes.
Yeah, I even detail in my book about one of my hiking buddies who actually perished in the White Mountains back in 2004. He was on a winter solo hike and he got trapped out way beyond any, you know, way to help him, and he died of hypothermia. So it was quite tragic.
Wow. What are some precautions? I'm obviously not hiking alone. That's at least in those conditions. But what are some precautions we could take?
Well, make sure you have a detailed weather forecast because, so, like you said, that day you climbed, it was a beautiful day down in the valley. But when you get up top, it's a whole different world. And in the wintertime, you can imagine how quickly things can change. My buddy Kenny, who died, he was a very bullheaded guy, and when he was faced with these conditions, he should have turned around and hiked out the way he came, but he didn't. He kept going and got pinned down too far from help. So
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of that in this community as far as like, I mean, first of all, it takes a certain kind of person to even want to attempt something like Denali or to attempt to even be out there. I mean, the average person is not going to even, that's not even going to be on their radar. So it does take a certain wherewithal just to even have, the guts, maybe that's not the right word, but to have the gumption to do something that is most people are not even gonna, it's not even gonna cross their minds. But then I feel like there's that extra gear, you called it bullheaded. There's that extra gear that I feel like I've got a lot of, gumption, but I've got this gear, maybe this internal switch in me is like, you know what? I don't know about that. I think that's a little bit too dangerous for me. Do you see that? Do you sense that there's kind of like this gear that maybe some of these high pointers you need to have a certain amount, but there needs to be some kind of governor on it?
Yeah, and I think maybe I've pushed that envelope a little too hard a few times and been lucky enough to get away with it. So
Mm.
um, I think some of my friends back in New Hampshire thought I was wired a little too similarly to my buddy Kenny, and they were worried about me maybe doing the same things. But fortunately, I have turned back a couple of times on places where I um, maybe maybe it turned out to be a good decision to turn back and prevented something from happening. Uh,
And that's a kind of an empty feeling, though. That's why I asked you about that earlier when I asked you about Denali, about how do you feel today. That's an empty feeling to turn
yeah.
around.
Yeah, I would love to call myself a 50 state high pointer, but 49 and a half just doesn't sound the same.
Hey, listen, it's a ton further than most have gotten. Ton further.
Yeah.
And I applaud that. Gary, if you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of ask you, you know, what what is it about the traveling, the climbing, the just kind of your are you, I mean, are you on your own right now? Do you have anybody with you? Any
Yeah, I'm on my own right now. Usually my girlfriend's with me, but she's back in Colorado for a few weeks tidying up some things, and she's going to rejoin me, and we're going to head off and start our next round of adventuring.
Gotcha.
Um, but yeah, um, usually that there's the two of us here in the van, and we've crisscrossed this country doing adventures, and even into down into Mexico several times over the past few years. And the to answer your question, I think the thing that the driving force is just the freedom to explore and do the things you want to do. And I'm able to fund that by finding jobs that I do on the road. Um, I'm a softball umpire, and softball's
Okay.
played everywhere. Softball's played everywhere. I'm actually I had a high school game here in Arizona last night, even. But I find tournaments all over the country that I can go and work on a weekend, and then we've got all week to play. So
That's fantastic.
yeah,
That's absolutely fantastic. My son plays little league, so I'm at the park all the time, and I've actually thought about that. I'm a former Division I college basketball coach, so I've actually thought
okay.
about like getting into refereeing and getting into umpiring potentially. I don't know. Maybe that's in my future too. That's pretty awesome.
It's
You look like an
you're,
umpire now that you say it, Gary. You
you're
look
out.
you do
Yeah,
look like an umpire.
yeah.
That's awesome. What you said, you mentioned the freedom. And where does that, I mean, where does that come from? Is that something that you maybe didn't have when you were younger? And maybe because I would argue, maybe some would argue that, being out like you're doing, kind of doing things your own way and just kind of, it's, it's almost like a whiplash reaction to something that maybe you didn't have earlier in your life? Or is this just somebody you always were and always wanted to do?
I think I've always wanted to be outdoorsy. I mean, I grew up in the wilds of Vermont. We were always out in the woods playing, climbing, running around. Um, and then after college, I got married, started a family, started my career. I was actually a sports writer, sports editor for a couple of newspapers in Vermont and New Hampshire. But um, and then I found myself in a situation where I was raising my three kids by myself because I went through a divorce and I had custody of three young children. So I had to put all those things aside.
Hmm.
And not until they were older and so, out of the house, was I able to get back to the things that I enjoyed and loved when I was younger. And because I had started a family when I was so young, I was still just in my early 40s when this all came about. So,
Where are your kids
so
today?
they're back in New England. Two live in New Hampshire, one lives in Maine, and they're doing great.
Yeah, it's amazing. Everything about your story. I have a journalism degree. I did sports writing. I've got two kids. I'm divorced. I've got custody of my kids. Everything you're saying right now is a mirror of what of my life in kind of ways. It's interesting.
Yeah. It's too bad that the internet destroyed the newspaper business because I really enjoyed being a sports writer.
Well, you can be a sport. You can be a pundit. There's
Yeah.
a lot of those out there.
Yeah.
Um, so what's next for you guys? You mentioned that your girlfriend's going to come back and you're going to hit the road for your next adventures. What's next on your list? What
Well,
have you not accomplished that you want to accomplish?
well, her and I have been together for 7 years now, and I had already become a 49 and a half state high pointer when I met her. So she had never done a state high point. I now have her up to 45. So I've done 45 of them again with her. So I'm working on her getting maybe up to 49. She has no interest in going to Denali, but we only have some of the hard ones left. And one of the ones that we want to hit this summer is Gannett Peak in Wyoming. So hopefully, the end of June, we're going to be taking a week-long bid to summit Gannett Peak and get her to number 46.
So what you mentioned the harder ones. What are the harder ones in your opinion? You've done them all. It looks like almost multiple times. You've done almost all of them multiple times. So what are the harder ones?
Well, most people think that the hardest one is Granite Peak in Montana. Um, we did that one two 2 years ago with some buddies, and well, with my buddy Van, who's um, you'll read about Van in my book if you get my book.
I'll get
Um,
it.
he's a he's a Cambodian refugee who's a climbing fool, hiking fool. He joined us when we did Granite Peak 2 years ago, so that got my girlfriend Lonnie to 45 state high points. I think that's probably the hardest one.
That's harder than
Um,
Rainier and harder than Hood.
Most people think so because there's class 4 climbing on Granite Peak that you don't get on the other ones. Now, there probably isn't any class 4 climbing on any state high point other than Granite Peak in Montana.
What is class 4 climbing?
Um, you don't want to fall. That's I think you're using your hands and your feet. There's sections that are vertical or almost vertical where if you were to fall, you would be badly hurt or worse. Um, so that's pretty much what I consider class 4 climbing. Um, it
Is
really has
there
the pucker factor is very much in effect.
is there a certain time of year that's better for Granite Peak?
I went in August or September both times. It's much easier when it's not snow and ice filled. So, although there are some snowfields that last all year long, uh, just below the summit.
Hmm. What is it a situation where you need to start at like 2 a.m. or something so you're not exposed in the to afternoon thunderstorms? Is it one of those situations or not? It's not really like that.
Well, there's several ways to do it. The first time I went across a place called Froze to Death Plateau, and I guess that's aptly named because it's pretty windy and chilly up there. But you camp at the end of that, and from there it's really just a short little scramble to the summit. Um, takes a couple hours to do it from there because you got that class 4 climbing I was talking about.
Hmm.
The last time we went from the south side, came up, we started actually down in Wyoming, crossed the border into Montana and summited from that direction. And again, you get up to the highest um, lake that you can get to, camp there, and then the next morning you just climb the mountain. So
Granite Peak. Okay, I haven't done that one.
yeah,
I haven't done Wyoming or Utah. I haven't done a lot of the western ones.
yeah,
And I attempted Humphreys in Arizona last May. I've got a tradition. I go to the Grand Canyon every year, and I run. You mentioned trail running and ultra running. I do rim to rim to rim. I've done it 4 years in a row now. I just love it. It's one of my
yeah.
favorite places. So this time I went to Arizona. I was like, gotta hit Humphreys, and it was just covered in snow. It was, I guess, one of the worst snows they had last winter, and so I took a buddy who probably shouldn't have gone with me, but I felt like I was kind of babysitting him a little bit, and it just took us forever. There was probably 2 feet of snow all over the trail. You couldn't see the trail. You're just using your GPS the whole time just to try to stay, on track the best you can. And I think we were probably out there for about 6 hours and did not make the summit.
The
At
first
a
time I
chance.
did, yeah, the first time I did Humphreys Peak in Arizona, I did it with my buddy Steve, who lived in Flagstaff, and I showed up on a day in, let's see, it was in February, where they had just gotten 2 feet of fresh snow overnight, and he said, "Hey, there's supposed to be a little lull in the storm tomorrow morning before the next storm comes in. We got time to summit and back." Well, we didn't quite make it to the summit before the next storm came in, and we got caught in a blizzard on the summit. And he had his little dog with him, and she was just coated with snow. Um, we couldn't see 5 feet in front of us. You're on the ridge because you're going to either fall off to the right or fall off to the left. So we ended up coming out and pretty much getting lost, but my buddy, being a local, pretty much knew where we were, and we were able to find our way off the mountain okay, safely. But
Right.
we pushed the envelope that day a little bit too.
And you did not make the summit?
No, we summited.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I went back in August to New Mexico, and I felt like that one was very similar. Wheeler was very
yeah,
similar to
yeah,
Humphreys.
yeah, yeah. I did Wheeler and Humphreys on that 34 state trip that I told you about earlier, and I was climbing. I had the guidebook that you hike into Wheeler Peak to a lake. I think it's called Williams Lake, and from there you're supposed to climb to the highest peak, which is on your left, which is Wheeler Peak. But when you get there, you look around, and there's about 6 feet, 6 different peaks there that all look the same height. So I kind of just had to guess which one it was because there was no trail at the time because it was, like I said, February, middle of winter. It was actually probably still January. I don't remember, but I just trudged straight up the mountain in waist deep snow to get to the summit. And I got about halfway up, and I looked back, and there was somebody following my tracks up the mountain. And I go, "Oh, geez, I hope I'm on the right mountain because he's going to be really PO'd if he gets up here and finds out he followed me up the wrong mountain." But turned out to be the right one.
So what do you do in a situation like that? You're waist deep in snow. I mean, are you wearing snowshoes or what are you doing in that situation?
I think I had crampons on that day, although I can't remember. It was back in 2009 now. And I certainly had full, I had winter clothes on, double layer, long underwear, snow pants over my pants, and all the gear that I needed. Um, Turned out when I got to the summit, it was just a beautiful bluebird, gorgeous day there. Um, it was uh, um, it was one of the best days I've had on a summit anywhere ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it being as windy. That was probably as windy of a spot I had ever been in.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get. I mean, I'm probably way wrong, but it felt like 70, 80 mile an hour winds. I mean, it was just I could barely stand up. It was so bad.
The second time I went there, that's exactly the same conditions I endured. Um, I had a friend with me, and she says I wouldn't have come up here if you weren't with me, and showed me that it was actually possible. So, yeah, she felt she was going to get blown right off the mountain.
What are Gary? What are some other memorable high points that you can think of? Some maybe even one that you had a bad experience in. Can you remember
Oh,
anything
well,
that comes to mind?
when I was on that high pointing trip in 2009, I was kind of on a schedule, and when I got to Tennessee to Klingman's Dome, they had just gotten 2 or 3 feet of snow overnight, and were expecting more. And they told me the road was closed, and I'd hoped to drive up to Newfound Gap and just hike it from there because it would have been much shorter. And but the road being closed, it was 17 miles from the visitor center to get to the top. And the park rangers said, the only way anyone's getting up there today is if they hike it. Well, they thought they were kidding, but I went out to my car and loaded up all my gear and came back in and said, "Okay, where's my permit?" And they weren't laughing anymore when I said that. And I ended up hiking up the road from New all the way from the visitor center to Newfound Gap in a total whiteout blizzard where I couldn't
So
see.
hold on a second.
Yeah,
You had to you didn't park at Newfound Gap. You had to
no,
hike to Newfound Gap
yeah,
and then hike up from there.
and then hiked to Mount Collins Shelter on the AT, which was
Mm-hmm.
where I was required to sleep that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I got there in the dark about 9:30 at night after about, I don't know, 8 hours of hiking, 9 hours of hiking. And it was like minus 16 degrees that night in the shelter. And then in the morning, I continued on to get the summit and hike all the way out. And
How'd you hike out? Did you come back the way you came?
no, I came down the road from all the way back to Newfound Gap on the road.
Hmm.
And it was just incredible up there, very peaceful. The Smokies were really smoking that day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as you could see the white clouds that are down in the valleys, and everything was so white and peaceful and pristine. But I really did kind of push the envelope that day. They were quite pleased to see me walk back into the visitor center, and they hadn't had to go out and rescue me. But
So you had to hike from the visitor center to
yeah,
the Newfound Gap trailhead,
yeah,
and
which
then you
was
hiked on the AT from there.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so I've done that. I've done two hikes in the Smokies where we started at Fontana Dam, which is south, and
Yeah.
hiked 33 miles to Klingman's Dome. And then we started, I can't remember where the starting point is, but it's north of Newfound Gap, 15 or so miles north of Newfound Gap. And we
Hmm.
hiked south to Klingman from there. But
Yeah.
and we did it in one year, we did it in June. We did Fontana Dam to Klingman in June. When we got up to Klingman's Dome, it was 25 degrees, wind blowing in June, late June.
Yeah. Well, I was there in January, and they told me that it was minus 16 up there that night, and the wind was blowing. I was in a lean-to. Of course, those lean-tos are open on one side, so the wind just swirls right in. So,
Yeah,
and
that doesn't sound fun at all.
surprisingly, I was nice and cozy that night in that in my lean-to at minus 16 degrees. The next night, I went out to dinner in Gatlinburg, and I was sitting in the restaurant shivering. So I think all the adrenaline wore off.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I don't know about doing that time of year, especially in those conditions. That's a little sounds a little bullheaded to me.
Yeah, that was. The next day I did Mount Mitchell, and I drove that one. So
So I drove that one, I guess to the parking lot. What, it's about a mile up, maybe not even a mile up.
Yeah, I drove as far as you could that day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was pretty beat from the day before. I did go back later with my girlfriend and did Mount Mitchell the correct way and climbed it. So
Yeah, I need to do that. I've never done that. I just drove it. I did a little Southern States loop, and I drove most of those. So I'll have to go back and climb that one.
yeah, on that trip in 2009, you mentioned Mississippi. My car was actually on the Mississippi State High Point. I was parked right on top of the little marker.
Were you?
So yeah, back then they really didn't have it, you just drove into this lot and there was a little tiny cement marker in the middle of a like a little mound. And today there's kind of a actual parking lot there, and it's a little more, you know, remarkable than it was back then.
Right. So let's see. What do you remember about? I mean, I'm sure you probably hit a lot of these on that trip you mentioned, but like Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, just some of those in kind of the middle of America. What do you remember about those?
Um, the well, I went a southern route on the way out, and when I got to Arkansas, um, I figured it after getting Arkansas, the best way to get Missouri was to backtrack then rather than try to drop down from Minnesota or Iowa later in the spring when I was coming back. So I had to backtrack and head back east to get the Missouri high point, and there was actually a ice storm that was following me there. And I was just ahead of it heading back east. And I got to the top of Tom Sauk, which is the high point of Missouri, and it had already started sleeting. And when I got back to my car, it's only about, what is it, a quarter mile hike into the woods from the parking lot
Right.
to get to the point of
Yeah, it's
Missouri.
it's it's like a sidewalk.
Yeah.
It is now.
And
Yeah.
with about a 1 foot elevation gain from the parking lot.
Right.
So I get back to my car, which is a VW Jetta, as I mentioned, and it's already sleeting. And I figured I was going to camp right there for the night, but I figured by morning the road that goes off of that state park was going to be a bobsled run. So I figured I better get off the mountain as quickly as possible. And it was quite an experience to try to drive off that mountain. I had to keep one tire in the dirt on the side of the road to keep from just turning it into a bobsled run. And then I get down to the bottom of the hill where you hit the main road,
Hmm.
and there were cars off everywhere, emergency vehicles, cars on their roof, cars into trees. And I think going back to the nearest town, which I think is Ironton or something like that,
Mm.
was about 6, 7 miles away. It was probably every car that I saw was off the road. Um, Fortunately, I grew up in New England and I kind of know how to drive in that stuff. I think I was the only one to avoid putting my car in the ditch, getting back to town, and I just holed up in a hotel for the next couple of days. Um, Turns out that storm was called the worst natural disaster in the history of the state of Kentucky at the time. So it was quite a bad storm.
Wow. Yeah, so I grew up right outside of Chicago in Northwest Indiana. So I've even though I haven't been up there in a long time, I've still got the memory of I know how to drive in the snow and the ice, which is
Yeah.
something they don't know how to do in Alabama and a lot of parts of the South, the southern states for sure.
Yeah.
So ice storm. What about going through? I've got a crazy story with Nebraska. I know this isn't a podcast about me, but what do you remember anything about Nebraska? Was that just an easy one? You just drove right up to it?
Well, you have to be on the lookout for bison for sure. It's an open range for buffalo there,
Oh, I didn't even know that.
and yeah. So when the, you don't want to park too far away from the actual state high point because you might have to run for it to get back to your car if you see a herd of buffalo coming over the knoll. So,
Well, I was trying to outrun a lightning storm.
well, we got when I went back there with my girlfriend, we got caught in a vicious hailstorm coming out of the Nebraska summit. So,
So there's a lightning storm, and probably tornadoes. Um, and I'm trying to avoid it. Look at the radar and try to position my car in such a way, and well, it just starts just dumping rain, and it had rained the day before, and so I get up. Well, I guess their county roads up there are all gravel, or they're dirt slash gravel. Chert. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah,
So
they're all laid. They're all laid out on a grid too. They're all
they're all
90-degree angles.
they're all laid out on a grid. So I get to the road that it's on, and I'm driving north on that road, and right in front of me is just a lake. Can't drive any further. So I look at my map, which I don't have any service, but I had the map downloaded. I look at my GPS map, and like you said, everything's on a grid. So I turn around. I'm like, well, I'm going to try to come in from the north and go south on that road. So I do that, and I'm coming down. I'm coming south. I'm back on that road, and I'm less than a mile away from the high point. Boom! Another lake right in front of me. Well, stupid me. And I already know I have to stop, and I'm probably gonna get out and walk at this point. I just happened to just keep creeping, and I thought I was on dirt still, but I was not on dirt or not going to dirt. There was a lot of sediment had risen to the top of this part of this lake or this ditch that was washed out, and my rented vehicle, by the way, my rented Enterprise vehicle, I'm sure they'd love to know about this, just went into the ditch, halfway buried in water, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere,
With no
and
cell service.
no cell service, and in the middle of a storm. Really, the storm's kind of over at this point, but and I'm about an hour away from pitch black dark. It was about 5:30, maybe 6 o'clock in the afternoon, in the evening. So I'd end up not even getting the high point. I'm less than a mile away from the high point. I don't even get the high point because I'm sitting here trying to get this car out of the ditch, which I successfully did. Found a guy, waved a guy down, got a tow truck out there, got it out, and thankfully the car ran. It worked, and I just got the hell out of there. So I don't even have Nebraska's high point.
Oh wow. Kind of reminds me of two stories that I had on that same trip up in North Dakota. Um, the state high point is right near this farm, and you actually have to drive down the farmer's driveway to get to where you start the hike from.
Okay.
And I got about halfway down that, and it just snowed. I got about halfway down that driveway, and I saw a big snowdrift in the middle of the driveway. And I go, well, can't be too deep. So I just gunned my VW and went plowing into it, and I got stuck like a fly in a spider web. And fortunately, my brother, who I had stayed with in San Diego when I was on that trip, gave me one of those little snow shovels for my birthday, which I had in the trunk. So I
Wow.
dug that out. Took me about an hour and a half to dig my vehicle out of that snowdrift. And then, of course, I still had the mountain to go climb. So I was kind of cursing the people that lived there why they didn't plow their driveway. But then by the time I got back, I realized that nobody lived there anymore. And that's why nobody been there to plow that driveway out. So
And Gary, I'm sure most people are not trying to climb these mountains in these winter conditions like it sounds like you have an affinity for.
yeah, I loved winter climbing when I lived back east. That was the favorite time of the year to climb. Um, but
Yeah, I just can't imagine a lot of people like me. They're waiting for the summer months to do because I haven't done North Dakota. I've done South Dakota, but I haven't done North Dakota yet. Um,
yeah,
so I'm probably waiting for
South
the summer months.
yeah, South Dakota. Well, I had snow to deal with in the winter months, but you'll have rattlesnakes, I heard, to deal with in the summer months when you get to the North Dakota one.
Yeah.
Although when I went back the second time with my girlfriend to do North Dakota, we were in the summer and we didn't see any rattlesnakes. Although I hear the place is crawling with them.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely look out for them. I've seen one rattlesnake ever in all my years hiking, and that was at the Grand Canyon. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, South Dakota is an awesome state high point. I've done it 4 times now.
No, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
And it's kind of easy too. I mean, somewhat. I mean, it was just, I love it when you get to you get to the top of a mountain and you actually have something to like look forward to. You have like a sight to see. You have something that's really nice. And that was is beautiful seeing that old, what was that, fire tower?
yeah.
Um yeah.
I didn't know that was there the first time I did it, and it was on that same trip. And it was I showed up about 4:30 in the afternoon, and it was going to get dark by 6:30, and it was snowing, as it was many times on this trip. And I thought I had the directions, I had the trail description, but I didn't look at the part where it told me about that fire tower on the summit, and it's made out of stone. It looks like a castle.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm hiking along in the gloaming. It was now getting dark, and I was turning my headlamp on. And all of a sudden, I came to this rock wall with a spiral ladder there, and I'm like, "What is this?" And then I climbed to the top, and that castle, basically a rock castle that's on the summit, just jumped out of the darkness at me, and I was just blown away. I didn't know it was there because I hadn't done my due diligence on my reconnaissance, and so that was quite interesting.
Let me see if I can. I want to try to pull something up real quick. There we go. Can you see
Yeah,
that?
that yeah,
Yeah, so that was actually I this is before I didn't even know high pointing was a thing. When I did South Dakota. I took a trip to South Dakota because I want to go to see Badlands and Mount Rushmore and do all that. I wasn't actively trying to even get to a high point. This someone just said this would be a really cool hike. And so I did it and I actually camped just below that. I set up a camp. I don't think you're really supposed to. But
yeah.
I set up a little camp right there, and that was actually the very first night. This is only maybe 4 years ago. That was the very first night I ever camped in my life.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I'm brand new to all this, but it was a really cool experience, and that tower was really awesome. Going up in it, you can go all the way up to the top, and
Yeah,
the views are really cool. So that's awesome. Well,
yeah.
Gary,
You can.
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say you got tremendous views from up there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Gary, I really do appreciate your time, and I know that it's really you got a lot of time on your hands. It sounds like, and you're doing some really cool things out there in Arizona. I love Arizona, by the way, and I love the area that you're in right now. I've been to Saguaro, and I've hiked a lot of those peaks over there, and I did a is it Lemon Mountain over there,
Mount Lemon,
Mount Lemon.
I can almost see it from right now if this little mound wasn't in front of me.
I did
So
Mount Lemon in a January, and I did it in probably your favorite conditions. It was
yeah,
28 degrees and snowing.
yeah.
That was a lot of fun. I
It's
love that
amazing.
Tucson area.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's a ski area on the top of Mount Lemon. It's the southernmost ski area in the United States,
Okay.
and they open it whenever they get snow up there. But ironically, when they get snow up there and they can open it, the road is closed to get there.
The road was closed when I got there. I had to
Yeah,
park. I had to park and walk up. Because
yeah,
so I did Mount Lemon. I did it where you start at the top, and then I did a big circle. I did a big loop
okay,
and got back up at the top. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's some great mountains to hike here. I mean, Tucson is completely surrounded by 4 little mountain ranges. I say little; they go up to 9,000 feet with Mount
Yeah.
Lemon. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I remember that was a lot of fun. I was in the I remember Saguaro is it's broken up into two different parts.
yeah,
I think I was
yeah,
on the eastern,
yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
And
I'm camping right near the western part right now.
are you?
Yeah,
I did this, man, I can't remember that it was one of my favorite hikes. And I can't even remember the name of the peak that I hit. I think it was the tallest, either the tallest or the second tallest peak inside of the national park. and you don't start the hike in the national park. You have to actually go through some farmland and park at a trailhead that's outside of the park, and then start hiking in, and you go into the park from there, and then you turn up. And I can't remember the name of that mountain, but I just remember the very end, the last quarter mile took me about an hour because I could literally touch the ground in front of me as I was climbing up it. I mean, it was so steep. It was incredibly steep.
Yeah, I don't
But
know if that's Rincon Peak
that's it.
or
Rincon. That's it.
yeah. Of all the mountains here in Tucson, that's the only one I haven't climbed yet. So I'm hoping to do it in the next couple of weeks before we leave.
Well, do Rincon if you can. That was one of my favorite hikes. And
Yeah,
the area at the top it's a huge spread out area you can see for miles and miles and miles, tens and 20s of miles. Really
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Can't quite see Rincon Peak from here, but
Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you, and I appreciate all the knowledge you have and your experience. And tell me your book, Chasing Summits. I'm gonna put a link. I'm gonna grab the link to it on Amazon, and I'm
yeah,
gonna put it in the description so people can go and check that out.
yeah. It's got all my adventures in there, including a 3 month backpacking trip I took through Central America one year, trips through Europe. I have 10 country high points too, including several in Europe, and um, I think the best mountain that I climbed that I talk about in the book is when I went to Switzerland and climbed the Matterhorn. That was an amazing climb.
Wow. Well, Gary, thank you so much. I appreciate everything you give back to the community. I really appreciate that, and take care. Stay in touch. Okay. Hope to hear from you here soon. I want to hear about these adventures that you're going on over the next year or two.
Okay. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
All right.
All right.